I'm going to use the next few minutes to introduce you to HDRN Canada's nearly finished online privacy training course, which is called Protecting Personal Information: Foundations in Data Privacy and Ethics for Personal and Personal Health Information in Research. And yes, that is a very big title, but it covers some big ideas in privacy, and we didn't want to leave anything out. So on the next slide, if we distill it down, I think we can describe the overarching goal of this training tool pretty simply. Our goal is to equip learners across Canada's provinces and territories with the shared knowledge, skills, and confidence they need to responsibly work with administrative data in a quickly evolving privacy environment. Now, when we refer to learners across Canada, you may be wondering exactly who we mean, and that brings me to our audience. We know that research that uses health data and other administrative data depends on many different people making informed, privacy-first decisions. And because of this, the course is designed for a very broad audience. We want this training tool to be available to HDRN Canada members and their employees, but we also want it to be available to research data users in general, to data stewards and custodians, data access committee members, research ethics board committee, oh my goodness, I can't speak, REB committee members, patients, partners, students interested in working with health data, and even the general public if this is an area of interest for them. And this is so everyone who's involved in administrative data and that ecosystem can share a common foundation in privacy, ethics, and responsible data use. And we have three main principles guiding the way that we've developed this course with such a broad audience in mind. And the first is that pan-Canadian or multi-regional work requires shared language and expectations. So a wide audience helps build a consistent privacy narrative across provinces and territories. And in relation to that, because the decisions of data stewards and researchers, ethics boards, and data access committees are so deeply interconnected, a shared training foundation can help people work together more smoothly and avoid more misunderstandings. Secondly, transparency builds trust. Including patient partners and the public in our training strengthens legitimacy and demonstrates our openness with how we work with administrative data. And finally, we believe the future workforce matters. So students and early career learners will benefit from early exposure to privacy principles, and these in turn will shape their work. So with that in mind, we're going to move on to talk about the course itself, starting with our table of contents. The course is made up of 4 separate modules. The first, on administrative data privacy, introduces the concept of secondary use of data for research. This module is a little bit more high level, and it could very well stand on its own for learners who need a basic understanding of what administrative data are and how they're protected, but who won't necessarily be working with those data themselves. For learners who could benefit from a more in-depth exploration, modules 2, 3, and 4 provide just that. Our largest module by far is number 2 on the data lifecycle, and that's made up of 5 separate sections representing the 5 stages of the data lifecycle. And those are data collection, access, use, disclosure, and retention, storage, and destruction. So Module 2 goes through the tangible steps that researchers and data stewards must take to protect personal and personal health information at every stage of the data lifecycle. Module 3 is a little more philosophical, focusing on data ethics and policy guidance, and that considers where our privacy policies come from and ethical factors researchers should consider when they're planning their work. And finally, the last module on emerging issues. It introduces learners to privacy risks, strategies, and solutions that are at the forefront right now. So these are things that are emerging primarily in relation to our changing times. And I personally imagine we're going to be updating this section frequently because digital data practices just keep evolving. Now, the full course isn't finished yet, but we are so close. In the meantime, I want to give you an idea of what the course is like in terms of look and feel and the content that we cover. And to do that, I'm going to walk you through a snapshot of Module 1, so like a little bit of a teaser trailer. Thank you, Donna. So before jumping straight into the content, learners are going to have some front matter to go through, including a short optional video showing them how to navigate their way through the course if they're new to e-learning. And then there's a longer course introduction video, and that functions much like a teaser trailer. It goes over, for example, what HDRN Canada is, what people are going to be learning, and why this is important. And this is where they will see that table of contents and they will receive their 4 learning objectives, one objective for each module. And once they've worked their way through that, we begin in Module 1, where users are going to learn about administrative data. They'll learn what it is, the incredible things it can be used for, and the importance of data privacy. And we kick that off with a really great interview with Charles Burchill. Then we have some slides going through definitions and examples of personal and personal health information, as well as an introduction to the FAIR information principles. And I should mention that these slides are all interactive. There's lots of layers and pop-out boxes when users click on different terms. There's audio explanations, things flying across the screen at different points. Unfortunately, can't show you that today in PowerPoint. So there's actually quite a bit of content that's hiding in there that you can't see today. But if you take the course later, you'll get to look at all of the pieces that are unavailable. So hopefully that's like a little carrot dangling for you to take the course as soon as it's online. Moving on to the next slides, we have some short audio and video clips reviewing what we mean by secondary use for research. And that leads us into an overview of privacy legislation in Canada, from a description of the types of things that Canadian legislation provides guidance on to an interactive map. And the map allows learners to click on various provincial and territorial privacy acts and to read through those acts online. So in the screenshot you see on the slide, that is what a user will see if they click on SK for Saskatchewan. And each piece of legislation links to the online document so they can read the information straight from the source. After a couple knowledge checks, which are like short quizzes, we turn our attention to data stewardship, starting with a more in-depth introduction to HDRN Canada. We already mentioned HDRN in the introduction video, but in this slide, learners get to learn and click through what HDRN's aims, missions, value, and vision are, and they're encouraged to go back to the website to learn even more. And this paves the way for a discussion of trusted research environments, like the one that Donna and I work at. Here we learn not only what these are, but what services they provide, from legal requirements to data governance, data management, overseeing potential data users, engaging with data business owners, and more. Then we begin to wrap up Module 1 on the next slides by continuing a discussion of trusted research environments and giving a very high-level description of the steps that researchers need to take to access the data that these environments hold. So, for example, completing a data access request, being reviewed by a research ethics board, signing a data access agreement, and other technical forms and requirements. So at this stage, we give learners a sneak peek into what's coming if they make it to Module 2, where they'll learn about the 5 stages of the data life cycle. And again, we highly recommend that if our learners are researchers or students who would be personally working with administrative data, or even if they're just involved in data privacy in any capacity. At the end of each of these sections, we provide questions for personal reflection. And learners don't need to submit their answers, but we still encourage them to do this activity because it acts like a bridge between what they've just learned and the applicability of that knowledge in their own life, whether that's at work or school, or maybe just an area that they're personally interested in. And finally, we conclude each module with a very brief summary of what they've learned. In this case, so far, they've learned what administrative data are and why they need to be protected. They've learned what constitutes personal and personal health information. They've learned the fair information principles, and they've learned some of the roles and models of data stewardship in Canada. And this sets them up nicely for the more content-heavy module 2. And I wish I could do this kind of a show and tell with the slides for all of the course modules, but there really is no time for that because there's a lot more than what I just showed you. So I'm just going to mention verbally what the remaining ones look at. Module 2, the data lifecycle, like I mentioned at the table of contents, this comes in 5 parts. And so what they will learn in the data collection section is who has authority to collect administrative data, the types of personal information that are out there, and the different levels of identifiability. We look at data sharing agreements, what's required to waive consent for the secondary use of data that weren't originally collected for research purposes, and in what types of situations consent cannot be waived. Then we go over data access, and here people will learn whether accessing personal data is justified given the potential risks to privacy. We talk about the importance of involving the public in research. We go over what's involved in submitting REB or Research Ethics Board applications, and we discuss requirements and considerations for the secondary use of administrative data with respect to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And here we spend some extra time talking about Indigenous data sovereignty in Canada. When it comes to data use, in this section we explain what data linkage is and how it works. We go over some key physical, administrative, and technical safeguards for protecting data, and we describe approaches to using data that help protect privacy, like working with aggregated versus disaggregated data and synthetic data. And finally, we look into secondary use for non-research purposes, like quality assurance projects. And then when it comes to disclosing or sharing data and results, in this section, we discuss risks of re-identification. And we provide an example of a real court case where the judge was focusing on whether it was permissible to release certain data fields. And that was really interesting if you want to check that out once the course is online. We go over Federal Privacy Act rules for when personal information can be disclosed, and we talk about how to navigate small counts when releasing information. We look at the cycle of disclosure and who has the authority to disclose or share this information. And in the last part of the data lifecycle, it's a long one, we talk about data retention, storage, and destruction, starting with the importance of having data management plans and extra considerations for keeping or destroying sensitive data. We describe secure storage practices. We go over a real-world example of a data retention and destruction policy. And we end the section with the best practices for secure data destruction, again with a really interesting case study of what happened when a medical practitioner in Canada was caught with improper data destruction. And that is the end of Module 2. Like I said, Module 3 is quite a bit shorter, which I'm sure people will appreciate after all that information. In this module on data ethics and policy guidance, we distinguish between data ethics and privacy, showing how they work together. Then we describe some data ethics frameworks and decision tools, taking time to do a deep dive into a tool that most researchers are already very familiar with, and that's the Tri-Council Policy Statement, Ethical Conduct for Research Involving Humans. Finally, before moving on, we spend a little bit more time on data management plans and how they help enforce considerations for data privacy and security. Then in the final module, titled Emerging Issues. This was constructed based on a discussion that the HDRN privacy team had, where together they sat down and they identified some of the most important privacy issues that are emerging right now. And so that formed the basis of what is in this final module. So here we introduce learners to things like advanced privacy preserving practices, and privacy enhancing technologies. So, for an example, that would mean federated learning and distributed analysis, which are probably not familiar terms, but if you take the course, you'll learn what those are. We go over some hot button issues that I think a lot of people would be interested in. So, specifically using AI when it comes to working with administrative, personal, and personal health data. We describe the five safes framework that HDRN Canada holds to. And finally, we end the course by focusing on advancing health data stewardship in Canada and ensuring public partners' voices are being heard. And so that is all the content broken down by module, a very high-level description. But in addition to the teaching and learning content, we have some extra features that are dispersed across the whole course. And these include interviews with privacy experts in video format. We have personal reflection questions like you saw in one slide before. We'll have a glossary that users can look at any time for a reminder of what the terms that they're hearing actually refer to. And we're adding video captions to help with accessibility. And we'll be providing a list of resources, which will have all the different pieces of legislation and the sources we refer to throughout the course in case people want to do some extra reading on their own. And then finally, at the end of all four modules, learners will have a final course-wide quiz. And that's going to be longer and more comprehensive than the knowledge checks that you saw in some of those screenshots earlier. After finishing the quiz, they will receive a digital certificate of completion, and they can sit back and be proud of themselves for all the work they just did. So that just about covers it for the course itself. We received some really great feedback from HDRN's privacy team on the first two modules, and we're working on making some small changes to those sections based on that feedback while we finish wrapping up the last few slides. We're going to have our final two modules out for review soon, and at that point, we can say that we are extremely close to being able to make the course live. And to ensure that a course that has this much effort going into it remains practical over the long term, we've built into our work plan the need for annual reviews by the privacy team, which will result in an updating of the training modules. So once a year, we'll go in at DataNB and we'll make changes to the modules anywhere that there's been updated privacy legislation or where best practices have changed. And where this is the first year, I'm sure it'll be a big year for edits as it's the first release, but we're excited to get this out so everyone can see it and can give us their feedback on what they think and what they would like to see changed.